better contemporary explanation, at least for some Americans, now this isn't the case universally, this is primarily true for white evangelicals, and only some white evangelicals, is that political preferences are now influencing religious behavior. And so we can think about this from old sociological theory by Hirschman of exit voice loyalty and neglect. So when people are members of organizations that provide them satisfaction, they tend to be loyal to those organizations. If you like a place makes you happy, like Elon makes all of us happy, we tend to be more loyal, we invest more heavily into the organization. But if you're dissatisfied with the organization, it's making you unhappy in some sort of way, you tend to either exit, try to change the organization, or neglect the organization. So this study is basically just for neglect. But a pattern that seems to hold is that Democrats are experiencing organizational dissatisfaction in white evangelical churches, which is encouraging neglect in the form of lower attendance. And the opposite story is going on with Republicans. I'd like to qualify something before I go further. This is not just because religious leaders at these churches are putting out consistently Republican messages. It also has to do with something outside of their control. So one, the media frame. So even if religious leaders themselves or a particular evangelical church is very liberal, there's some of those in this area in North Carolina, they can't control sort of public perception of their denomination as a whole because there is a consistent media narrative that white evangelical churches vote for Republicans. Robbie and I are contributing to that at this moment. This is sort of a general pattern that extends to society, and so people tend to infer that. So you don't have to go to a Southern Baptist church in my hometown and sort of get some sense of what they actually believe. Second is that membership in churches is increasingly homogenous. It's harder and harder if you're a strong Democrat to find another strong Democrat in your evangelical church. We know from a number of other studies that in our polarized society, Democrats tend to be friends with Democrats, Republicans tend to be friends with Republicans, even if they're not actually making friendship decisions based on party alone. It's just Republicans tend to do things that are different than Democrats. Democrats tend to be involved in certain social activities, have certain consumer preferences that Republicans don't have. Our society is divided already at sort of a local, very micro level by politics. And that is carried over to churches as well. So we can think about this as a notion of homophily, birds of a feather flocking together. So I've been pointing out sort of the difficulty in assessing causation in these surveys. But there's a special type of survey, Dr. Jones is collecting some of this data now, called panel surveys. And panel surveys are the same people who are tracked over time. And so in this case, this result is from a panel survey of people who were interviewed in 2000. The same people were found again in 2002. They were given the questionnaire again. And then again in 2004. And so through some sort of complex statistical analysis, we can try to determine what actually comes first. When we have sort of this interdependent process, when we have some simultaneous relationship going on, what variable is actually causing the effect? And so this graph plots change in frequency of church attendance by party identification. And so the gray line, which is very hard to see, is change in party church attendance between 2004 and 2000 for Catholics and non-evangelical Protestants. The black line, with the squares in it, is change for evangelical Protestants. So we see this fairly divergent pattern. So independents, who are evangelicals, tend to not change that much in church attendance. They're right there at sort of the intercept. Catholics and non-evangelical Protestants in general don't change that much. But what we see is a drastic increase in church attendance among evangelical Republicans and a drastic decline over time among evangelical Democrats. And so there is this sorting in, sorting out going on within American churches that's driven in large part by political preferences. So these are based on multivariate models so that we can isolate the effects of party and not sort of get caught up in saying, well, is this just because evangelicals tend to be richer than